Hashtag psychotherapy unfogged with Mark Fielding.
Hello, welcome to episode 13, series 4 of Hashtag Psychotherapy Unfogged. As you know, I'm Mark Fielding, your host and psychotherapist and relationship counsellor. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Carlos Vasquez, elite mindset coach and motivational speaker, and also the CEO of How to Battle, a mindset development coaching program. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Carlos.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to kick off with what I know is an enormous question, because obviously I've researched you and know a bit about your backstory, but I always ask our guests what personal experiences they've had in life which brought them into the field. And I wonder whether you could just say a bit more about that. I mean, what personal experiences have led you here?
Yeah, well, I mean, a life full of trauma led me here.
Yeah.
Started when I was about 13 years old and I ran away from home, sleeping in the abandoned car in my friend's apartment complex. Shortly after, got addicted to drugs, alcohol, became a gang member, exposed to a lot of violence, a whole new lifestyle than what I grew up from. You know, I grew up in a good neighborhood and in the suburbs, and it was like a complete shift. But that's where I found myself, seeking acceptance. You know, I found my father figure there and friends, and was exposed to a lot of things, and which ultimately caused me to develop PTSD, specifically after I saw my best friend commit suicide in front of me. That was like the big pivotal point in my life. And it caused me to have nightmares. I couldn't sleep, started to become more violent. And by the time I was 19 years old, I was on my way to prison for 20 years for armed robbery. And it was in prison. My first decade in, I was worse than what I went in. You know, I became even more violent. And about a decade in, I went to solitary confinement, where I was in there for 3 years, which made things even worse. You know, in retrospect, I look at it like, with all the trauma and all the stuff that I dealt with at a young age, I never sought help. I never got therapy. I never saw a psychologist, nothing, because it was frowned upon in my community and amongst the people that I was associating with. It was a sign of weakness. And so I never even considered that. Like, I always felt like this is how it is. You just got to keep going forward. And, but I got to a point of suicide when I was in solitary confinement, and I was going to end my life. And a chaplain came into my life, and he encouraged me and he challenged me to not give up, but to keep going and figure out ultimately, what my purpose is. And I took that challenge, and I started to work on myself. And in the process of working on myself, I started to read books about the mind, and I started to read books about how one develops PTSD and how one develop all the things that was going on in my life. And then with that, I started to learn ways to overcome that. And in time I did. And then I started to work on my own, philosophies, that worked in my life now, which I put in my book so I could help others and teach others. And so now that's where I'm at now, personal development, helping people become the best versions of themselves, helping people overcome all the things that I once faced. And through my lived experience, I'm able to connect with them and understand them, and then, treat them with, years and years that I educated myself in prison and solitary, and still to this day. So that's how I got to where I'm at today. And, I found my purpose, and unfortunately, I never was able to tell the chaplain that, because I never saw him again. But I think that, like I tell people, it wasn't so, the chaplain, it was, God coming to me in the form of a man, telling me what I needed to hear exactly when I needed to hear it. And so that's what I try to be now, that person that tells people what they need to hear, when they need to hear it, to get them through one more day. And I feel like I'm doing pretty good in that.
Yeah, and looking, there's so much in your story that I could pick up on, but that moment with the chaplain, when you were you were feeling suicidal, you were at your lowest ebb. I mean, goodness me, 3 years in solitary confinement. I mean, that is a long time to be in solitary confinement. But that really was the moment, that interaction. And I know you kind of slipped the Bible under the door, didn't you? That was the moment when you began to kind of turn your life in a different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it was in solitary confinement where I started my transformation.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and sometimes you have to be at your lowest point to start the transformation process. And for me,
yeah,
I mean, that's what it took. And I feel that I needed to be in solitary. I needed to be alone. I needed to be in solitude because had I not been there, um, I would have never got to that point where I was ready to end my life. And then I would have never met the person that challenged me to keep going and figure out what was, what my purpose was. So it was solitary confinement is a terrible place. And even when I talk about it now, it's still like, gives me chills because it's meant to break you. And it really got close to breaking me. Like
yeah,
I was there. And so I know like that from that point, where people are like I talk to, even now, like they're at that point. They're like how I was in solitary at that point. But I always look at it like, if I could make it out of that, so can they. And so that kind of, pushes me to not give up on my mission, my personal
yeah.
mission, but also on the individuals that I want to help. There's always, it's never too late. There's always a way out. I think you just need the right help and you need the right guidance in order to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree, and I think it is true what you say, Carlos. Often for people, and I mean, I want to say often for men, I mean, no, this is not gender specific, right? But I mean, men, I think particularly often won't ask for help, for all sorts of complex reasons, and it's only really when they're at their last moment, suicidal ideation, contemplating the end, nervous breakdown, whatever, that perhaps they'll reach out for help. I mean, I'm kind of wanting to ask you a little bit. I mean, those 3 years in solitary, how did you manage your mind? Because I'm guessing your mind must have been busy because there's no other stimulation. I mean,
Mhm.
was your mind very busy? I mean, I'm guessing it probably was.
Yeah, it was tough because, you know, going into solitary confinement, I had been in and out of solitary confinement before. I actually went in for 3 years, so I had a taste of it. I experienced what it was like. I remember going back there, and there were men back there that had been back there for 20 years. And when I went back there, and they told me that I was going to be in there for 3 years, but ultimately, 3 years was the time they gave me. But ultimately, they didn't have to let me out at all because when you go to solitary confinement and you're a shot caller in prison, and then you're in that gang life, they have different rules in there. Like they don't have to let you out. All they have to do is say, we still think that you're a threat to the safety and the security of the institution, and we can't let you out. So we're extending your stay here for another year. And it just continues to happen. So people were back there that went in with 2, 3 years, never got out. And so in my mind, the 3 years was in my mind, but I'm like, I may never get out of here. And so
Yeah,
um, and then being in an enclosed environment like that, not being able to see further than 6 feet in front of you, it does something to you mentally.
yeah,
And to this day, like my eyes aren't the same as they used to be because of that. Because looking far distances is something that I didn't do for years. And those are the little things that people don't think about. When they create these things to put humans in, which is really inhumane. They don't know that like us by nature are not meant to be confined like that, and it only makes us worse. So
yeah,
for me, mentally, the only way that I could escape that is just dreaming and reading and
yeah,
praying.
yeah,
That's it. Because I lived my life through the books I read. I lived my life through my dreams, visualizing them, like literally writing down all the things that I wanted in life and just imagining myself having them.
mm,
Reading books like Man's Search for Meaning, where I read about a guy who was in a worse situation than me, and it got me through another day because it inspired me to like, if he can do it, I can do it.
yeah,
He's a man, I'm a man. Two different walks of life, but at the end of the day, we're both men. And those things help me get through it.
yeah,
And so it's hard. Like you have to be mentally tough and strong. And had I not ran away at 13 and been exposed to gang violence and slept in an abandoned car, and had I not went through that, which created a stronger mind, I think, in
yeah,
me, I probably wouldn't have made it, or I would have, ended my life, or I would have never been normal. A lot of people get out of solitary and they're not normal. They never come back. And So I think it was just my life experiences created a mindset that allowed me to deal with adversity, and still to this day. So
And I guess that, obviously nobody wants to suffer, but I guess, and I don't think this is true for everyone that suffers, but often I think suffering can accelerate personal growth, which I guess is what you're talking about. And I guess, that there was a lot of suffering. I mean, I'm looking at the kind of PTSD, and we don't have to go into that in any particular depth, but goodness me, it was complex trauma, wasn't it? I mean, in your book, you write about, being an 8-year-old and witnessing, a friend, having a terrible accident on a bike. So I guess the trauma started there, and then subsequent experiences just kind of added to it. So I guess it gave you a bit of quite a lot of mental resilience. So when you're in solitary, you drew on that, I guess.
yeah, I believe so. And then that's why, like, a lot of parents that I talk to, I always tell them, like, you have sheltering your kids is damaging them. It's hurting them. You have to let them get out there and be exposed to challenges and adversity too, because life is hard. Life is tough. They're going to go through traumatic experiences. You're going to go through losses and deal with pain. And if you don't allow them to find some of that early on, naturally, like just through life, then when it does happen, they're not going to be able to bounce back from it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the kids that I work with now, the reason why that they're such, in a tough place is because of that. It's because of the parents, are afraid to let them get out there and be exposed to things and challenge themselves and stuff like that. So I think me at an early age being exposed and all that, and obviously mine was an extreme and it's different, but
Yeah.
Just like you said, seeing that kid on the bike have that terrible accident when I was young, that was kind of like, my first real exposure to something really traumatic. And but it set me up to be able to now go survive in the streets, I believe.
Yeah. And then just kind of rewinding a little, I'm really glad you referenced Viktor Frankl and that book, because I'm a massive fan of Viktor Frankl, and he, different kind of circumstances, but he managed to find the resilience to kind of get through a Nazi kind of camp, didn't he? And there was a quote that he uses that you also use in the prologue of your book, and between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And I loved it you started your book like that, because I really, really love that. And I think it's so true, isn't it? The space is the time when we can choose. And I guess you started to choose differently from that moment, really, when your life changed in solitary.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Yeah.
The power of choice. I think that if people really understood that they did have a choice, to respond in the way that they want to respond to, no matter how bad the situation is, it would help them a lot get through those tough situations. And even to this day, I still try to practice that. It's difficult, to do it at all times, but like I aspire to do that, because I feel that even if somebody else does something that, I have the power to respond to that. Like they do something to me that, trying to hurt me in a way, I could look at it like, it's that person's going through something, that person might be dealing with something, and I'm not going to take it personal. And I have the power to say, I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm going to be in control. And then there's something empowering about that, knowing that really you can be in control of any situation, no matter how bad it is, then you will not allow the circumstances you're in, the people around you, your environment, to dictate your happiness and all that stuff. You'll be in charge. And once I got to that point in my life, I'm a lot, more at peace, and I'm a lot more grateful and happy, and things just seem better when you live like that.
Yeah. And it also kind of leads me to something else you say, I think in one of your interviews or one of your book, about finding your purpose.
Yeah.
And that is also something I really resonated with as a person, and that is so important. Everyone can't find their purpose, but finding, if you are able, I think, to find your purpose as you've done, it's completely life-changing. And I guess it's really changed your life, didn't it? You've got inspiration, you pushed through the PTSD, you found your purpose, and you've moved on with that. And even what you were saying about visualizing in solitary, I guess that is also, you're visualizing your purpose, you're visualizing the future. Yeah. And I guess that is something that you teach in your coaching program, I would imagine.
Yeah, like you have to have a why. You have to have a reason to get up in the
Yeah,
morning. Yeah, and that's your purpose. And it may just it could shift, it could change. Your purpose can alter, and my purpose in solitary confinement at one point was just, my mom, getting home to her and making sure that I can take care of her
yeah,
because I didn't love myself enough to feel like I had a purpose yet.
yeah,
Like I hadn't got to that point yet. It was so sometimes when you really don't like yourself and you feel like you're not worthy of anything and you're at that point in your life, your purpose has to be something besides you. It
yeah.
has to be
Agree.
somebody maybe that you love, some or even a dream that could be your purpose. Whatever, it's something to get you through the next day, and then as
Yeah,
you are able to evolve, you'll start loving yourself, you'll start taking care of yourself, and then you'll start to
yeah,
figure out what your purpose is, and then that'll compel you forward and push you forward every day, and now you have something to strive for. So I think finding what that is first is key, and that's one of the things I do in my program is try to help people discover what is your why you get up in the morning for. Do it for that. If
yeah.
anything else, do it for that or that person, because that's the starting point.
Yeah, and I really agree. I mean, finding your purpose is so important, isn't it? And what you were saying around, if you're in a position where it's quite difficult for you to connect with your purpose in the moment, making your purpose, compassion for somebody else. I mean, that is also, I think, a fantastic way in, really. I mean, it kind of brings me back a little bit to, to your kind of personal history story, because I guess your mum was on her own. I mean, your dad left. Do I remember that right? And your mum was on her own. So I guess your mum was really, really suffering. Really, she was depressed. Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. She's been through a lot. I mean, since she was a child. I just recently talked to her about things that happened when she was a child. So she's been dealing with trauma her whole life as well. And when my father left, she went into a deep depression. But even with that, she, went and took on 2, 3 jobs. At one time she had 3 jobs to try
Wow.
to provide a
Yeah.
way, never gave up. And
Yeah.
I respect her for that. And then my sister got pregnant at 16, and then another baby was coming around. And she took the responsibility of that. She became,
Yeah.
a mother again to my sister's baby. And it's like, and she's even to this day, she still hasn't fully healed. And I think that her wounds are just a lot deeper than mine. But I've seen so much growth within her. And I think a lot of the growth has come because of the growth that happened within me. And so I think that it's a huge thing. Like if for us, men, women, whoever's listening, you know, hold yourself accountable. And if you change, if you transform, if you start doing things right, you'll be surprised that the people around you, they'll start to change as well. And a
Yeah.
lot of times we're unhappy because the people around us are unhappy or they make us feel unhappy. But the best way to help people change is to lead by example. And so that's what I try to do. Like she's still a part of my why, my purpose. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, and I'm just grateful she's still around so we can, enjoy time together.
And I guess, yeah. I mean, I often think of it as like rippling out. I mean, I really agree. I mean, it's like you work on your own development, and you kind of, I don't know, transcend. I mean, I guess it's all about transcendence, really, isn't it? You kind of maybe transcend, what was a difficult childhood, and you work on your own development, and that ripples out to other people, arguably to everyone, really. I guess the more people can raise their consciousness, the better the world becomes, which I think
Yeah.
is what you're saying, really. Something that I really agree with. I mean, I wonder if I could just maybe segue into your work. I mean, I want to talk about your work. Can you just say a bit more about it? I know you do many things. So could you
Yeah.
give our listeners just an idea of, what you do and yeah, the groups you work with?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how to battle was something that I started when I first got out. I knew I wanted to get out and continue to help people. When I was in prison, I started organizing, men's program mentoring programs. I started doing self-help groups with lifers
Yeah,
before I got out, and started facilitating those and organizing those, and then created my own. And I knew that when I started to get those results from the men that I know have been through, some of them been through way worse than I had been, and we were seeing results, we were having breakthroughs. I knew that I wanted to get out and continue to do that because there's nothing more, satisfying than helping another person emerge into the person that they could become.
Yeah,
And
so
so I
true.
knew I wanted to do that. And so I got out, I didn't know where to start. I didn't really have a foundation much. I just knew that's what I want to do. So um, I put it out there in the universe, I guess you could say. And I always continue to focus on it, continue to learn about what it would take for me to start a coaching business, because I felt that was the quickest way for me to reach people and then reach a lot of people and then grow it. I always want to figure a way to grow. So I started learning, and in the process of learning and constantly thinking about it, I started to meet more people that helped me to start, my coaching program, which is How to Battle. And I got the name because when I first got out, I used to how to everything, like how to create an email, how to do a resume.
Yeah.
So I wanted a place where people can go to where they're dealing with something, a battle in their life, and they can go there and we can help them, whether it's addiction, whether it's depression, whether it's just limiting beliefs, whatever it is, we could help you overcome that. We could help you become the best version of yourself. So I started that, and just single-handedly pretty much growing it, learning. And then I started to work with the youth, and I started to work with formerly incarcerated once they got out, and seeing my impact, learning along the way, because I've never worked with youth. I was in prison and working with men, but I learned that a lot of the same principles that I was applying with the men was working with the youth, and I just adjusted it a little bit, created some more programs. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing. And I've been working with schools and working with foster group homes, still working with like individuals as well, and continuing to learn and create my impact. I have a men's coaching program now that I'm doing with a friend of mine who did 12 years, creating another one, a faith-infused coaching program, with hopefully to bring young people back into living a life based on the word, because I feel like there's so much value in there. And that was the first book that I picked up and read after the chaplain had his conversation with me, was the Bible. And a lot of the stuff we read in self-help groups today comes from the Bible. It's just changed up. It's switched up in the wording and the way they convey the message, but there's so much value in there. So, and me, like, getting out, where I started to meet everybody was in church. That was, I knew I didn't know anybody. I got out, went to church. Now all my great friends have accepted me, and they've helped me, and they coach me and mentor me. And so I want to like help young people get back into the church environment, because there's so much value there. So yeah, I've been doing that, speaking, doing my speaking, telling my story, doing my workshops. Yeah. And then I finished the book, wrote the book, and it's crazy. I wrote the book for the young people that I was coaching and mentoring, specifically in mind. And I've been blessed to have it get into a lot of schools already for the classes. So that's been great. Working on another book right now too.
And I guess the mentoring, I mean, just to take one part of that, I guess the mentoring for young people, I mean, goodness me, that's so important, isn't it? I mean, who knows, how many lives you've changed for the better, really, for doing that mentoring. I mean, often kids, from, well, I mean, this wasn't your story. I mean, you weren't from, a kind of poor neighborhood, but I think often kids from difficult socioeconomic circumstances, can end up, moving into the wrong area, really. So, I mean, often through the lack of, perhaps positive role models. So I guess you are really providing that. I mean, that must be very satisfying work for you. I mean, all of it, really, the men's group as well. I mean, when you see, I mean, in the men's group, do you find men with men it's more difficult for them to open up in that environment, or can men be? We do a lot of we've done a lot of podcasts about men's health. Men finding it difficult to open up. I don't know. Has that been your experience with running the men's group, working with the self-help with the lifers? Does it take men a little bit of time to warm up to kind of?
Yeah. I think with the men, like in prison, I remember having groups of 30, and we used to sit in a circle, and we would have a few people who like just wanted to share, and they wanted to help, and they wanted to get things off their chest and tell their story, and then talk about their trauma, and then now try to work on bettering it. You have those people, then you have the ones that sit in there and don't say anything. And I think that that's okay, because that person that's sitting there and not saying anything, they got up that day and they walked in there and they sat down there for a reason.
Yeah,
And they
agreed.
sat
Yeah,
down, they sat there and they listened and they listened. And
yeah,
eventually that's when we sometimes, like after a few weeks, they'll be the ones to finally say something and finally
yeah,
open up or talk to you on the side outside of the group. And so I'm very hopeful when I work with the, men in general. Like, I know that it's in there, and I know it's going to take a little bit to get it out of them for them to
yeah,
start the process. But I'm confident that it'll happen just because I've experienced it with men who, the fact is that they showed up tells me
yeah,
everything. But now with the youth, it's a little bit different, and it's a lot more challenging. And I think that's why a lot of people don't venture off into working with the youth, even though it's probably the biggest problem that we have and it's most important. It's because of that. Like, they just, they can't connect with them. The youth is
yeah,
different.
yeah,
They might just be there because they're forced to be there to go to school or to go to class or whatever. They might feel forced, but they don't really want to be there. And so
yeah,
you have to convince them that being there is the best thing for them, to help them get to where they ultimately want to get to, which they don't even know. And so it's very challenging with the youth, which is why, I do it, is because, like, I feel that, it's a huge problem and it's challenging. And
yeah,
I know that I was once them, and I know that I can in some way help them and spark something in them,
mm,
like that chaplain did for me. And so that's like, it's very challenging, but I could see why most people wouldn't want to venture into that.
yeah.
But for me, I'm like, let's go, let's do it, because I'm always looking to help those that are in most need and most difficult to reach.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, I don't work with kind of younger people, but I imagine it must be a lot more challenging. I mean, I guess your backstory must help. I mean, because I guess you have been with some of the kids you're working with, you have been in their position. That must help them connect to you, I would imagine. The fact
It
that
does.
you understand, don't you? I mean, for somebody, I
Yeah.
mean, you understand what they're going through, perhaps. So I guess that
Mhm.
must really help with the connection.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
It does, and I think that's a huge part of it. I think that the fact that they can kind of, when they look at me, they could see somebody that you know, um, that they could identify with in some way. Through my struggle, when I tell them my story, it's like
yeah,
now they have, maybe part of my story is something that they're going through right now, or maybe something that they've been through, or
yeah,
something that they know somebody that's been through.
yeah,
They might have an uncle, a brother, a dad that's in prison. And then they see me and it's like, okay, well, now they have hope for that uncle, dad or brother,
mm,
because they like, okay, if this guy can get out and he was all the things that they were, he can do it. And I think that you make a connection there.
yeah,
And then I think it's also a huge part of it is they just feel my passion. Like, you can tell when somebody's in a room and they're just there because they're getting paid. You can tell when somebody's just
yeah,
there because, that's their job, but ultimately, um, they're not passionate about it. That's not their purpose. But like,
yeah,
I'm so aligned with my purpose that it's undeniable. Like, when I'm in
yeah,
there, I know I'm speaking to them because it's real. Like, I'm really trying to help them, and I think they feel that. I think that kids are a lot more intelligent than what we think, and
yeah,
their ability to feel a person, is far more advanced than what we think. And so I think they feel that too. They know, like, this guy is really here trying to help. So let me give him the time and listen. And then maybe through that listening, that's when the change starts.
yeah, yeah. And then the kind of being aligned with your purpose piece again. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think people can totally get that. I mean, somebody could be standing in front of those kids. They could be there for the paycheck. They could, I mean, it's still
Yeah.
good they're there, right? But when somebody stands there and they're really passionate about what they do, it just ripples out, doesn't it? People get it. I think old, young. I mean, it's difficult to even find the words to describe it, but it just brings an energy, I think, really to the room that I guess the
Yeah.
people you work with kind of pick up on, really. Just wanted to just rewind a bit. Could I ask you just a bit more about the self-help groups in prison and just what led you to set them up
Mhm.
and just kind of what experiences you had within them? Because I guess when people start opening up, there must have been a lot of trauma in the room, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, everybody has a story, and,
Yeah,
um, you could write so many movies after the stories that I've heard from the men in prison. I mean, I've heard the worst things that, could possibly happen to a person in their life
yeah,
right there in those rooms, with those guys who are, serving life in prison or a lot of time. And that's just their trauma, but that's not even to mention, the crimes they committed, which is also mostly murder, and
Yeah.
the guilt that they feel, the shame that they feel, um, and the things they have to deal with every single day, knowing that they took somebody's life. And like you mentioned earlier, the ripple effect of that, knowing that they hurt, the families that are connected to that person that they murdered, because once you change, then you can no longer, hide, those feelings anymore. Because a lot of times when we do things to hurt people, we deal with them by living this persona of, okay, I'm a gang member, I'm a violent criminal, I'm hurting more people. That's just what I do. You take on that, you embody that
Yeah.
identity. But once you change and you're like, I'm no longer going to be that person, like, how do you deal with all the people you hurt?
Yeah.
Right. And the only way to deal with that is to make amends. And you make amends the best way you can, which is to first become the best person you can become, and then go help another person. And that helping another person could be just telling them
Yeah.
something that they need to hear to help them get through a day, working with them to now help them get, their life together. And then eventually when you get out, you can, reach out and help more people. But yeah, being in those groups, was very, it's painful. It's painful
Yeah.
because you have to talk about, the things that you went through as a child. You
Yeah.
have to talk about the crime you committed. You have to talk about forgiveness and remorse and empathy. And then you have to start talking about how you can do things better. And it's a painful process. But, like, I think that it's that's where that's the paradigm shift. That's where it's like you see, like, okay, redemption is real, like forgiveness and
Yeah.
forgiving yourself is real. It's not just something you say because it sounds good. Like, I've actually seen, grown men who've killed 2, 3 people, um, forgive themselves. And that's a powerful moment,
Yeah.
that I've never seen since I've been out. It's just something you just have to live through to really truly understand it.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, that I'm really connecting with the power of that moment. I mean, self-forgiveness is so important. And I guess from what you say, Carlos, that gang members, they'll have the persona, I'm a gang member, this is what I do, and then they'll do. But then once they start changing, all of the guilt and all of the empathy and the shame will come up, which must be, goodness me, it must be totally overwhelming for some of the lifers when they start to
yeah,
really connect with the empathy for the people that have suffered. Goodness. Yeah, and then I guess
yeah,
the healing of that also very powerful. I mean, in your book, and I'm kind of referencing it here a little bit, you talk about building self-confidence after years of self-doubt, and you say one of the things you say is practice self-compassion, and I guess that is what we're talking about here. Could you say a little bit around what that is? I mean, for you and for in terms of your program, practicing self-compassion. Well, I mean, what
yeah.
is it? What do you do? What? Yeah,
Well, it's like one of the questions that people often ask is like, what would you tell your, 9-year-old self, your 10-year-old self, your 13-year-old self? Like, if you were to see him now, what would you tell him? And I think that that's where compassion starts. This compassion starts with, going back to, that kid that used to play baseball or used to go to Catholic school, or, that used to just dream of being an astronaut. You go back and you
yeah,
you you talk to that kid, you write a letter to that kid, which ultimately is yourself. And then that's when you start to realize that, you're a human being worthy of having a good life, and you know um you're not the sum of your worst acts. You're better than that. And that you just are like an onion, and you just need to peel away those layers to
yeah,
get to the core of who you truly are. And you're not that fake persona that you've developed, that gang member, that person that just got lost. They got caught up in, the trauma.
yeah,
And you let your environment overcome you. You can forgive yourself because that's not you. You got to, so it's going back to, identifying, those impact events in your life. When you were a kid, what are those things that you remember that, that caused you to go down a certain way? And like I mentioned earlier, for me, it was like
yeah,
seeing Chris commit suicide was one of those impact events. And, so you have to empathize, and you have to put yourself, in a different mind frame, and analyze, the child that you were when all that was happening, the youth, the young person.
yeah,
And then you start to be compassionate because you realize that, you know, it's not really who you are, it's just who you became, but you can
Yeah.
overcome that. And once you realize that, then you start to work on yourself, you start to care about yourself, and then that's when the change happens. So um you have to have a level of self-compassion if you want to truly change.
Yeah.
And so it's just processes of doing that. And that's what I try to do too with the people I work with, is to get them to understand that that you aren't that person that people may say you are. Even in prison, when you go to prison, they label you, they give you a paper saying that you're now a convicted criminal and that you have a number, and you're
Yeah.
talked to like you're less than human because you're in prison. And so you have to overcome that. And that's the mindset shift that needs to
Yeah.
happen. So that's what I do. And it's the same out here. It's the same out here. People grow up in certain areas and they feel like they have to be a part of a gang
Yeah.
because they grew up
Yeah.
in that area.
True.
But no, you don't. And so, part of that is to, have that talk with yourself, have a real
Yeah.
talk with yourself, and identify those areas that created that negative change, and then start doing the law of replacement and replacing those negative behaviors with now positive ones.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really love that strategy. Yeah. Because I guess the child is, I mean, all children are born kind of innocent and open for anything, but environmental factors, I guess, cause people to go in directions that perhaps they wouldn't choose. I mean, goodness me, when you're getting people in the room to go back to, those young ages, that also must be really powerful. I'm guessing people have big emotional reactions probably at times. It's kind of a therapy model. I kind of do that in therapy sometimes. It's like inner child work. When you get people to go back to their inner child, sometimes it's
Yeah.
very, very powerful. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I know we're running out of time, but I wanted to pick up on education. I mean, this is a big, there's a whole chapter in your book about it. It's a big part of your story. I mean, what would you say about education? Because I mean, this is part of this is one of the ways you've really kind of developed, isn't it? You've just embraced education. Could you maybe say a little bit more about your own journey and maybe why it's important for others?
Yeah. Education, I believe education is, a huge part of transformation. It's a part of you becoming the person you want to become. You won't ever get there if you don't educate yourself. For me, education was something that got me through, days when I was in solitary confinement, when, all I could think about was, how I'm going to end my life, or how I'm going to, make it through the next day. I knew that, like, education made me a little bit better the next day. Like, if I learned something new today,
Yeah.
tomorrow I'm going to I have a little bit of improvement in who I am as a person. And, once I started to educate myself, that's when the change really started to happen, because now I was receiving the answers to the questions that I had, which was, why was I, not able to sleep at night? Why was I having nightmares? Why was I feeling guilty about things? And
Yeah.
had I not educated myself, I would have never found the answers. And so education is the answer, and
Yeah.
education is the answer to everything that you want to know. Like, if you want to
Yeah.
live a better life, you have to educate yourself and understand how you have to go about doing that, what steps you need to take. And if you want to make it in this world, you have to continue to educate yourself to be able to keep up with how quick that it changes.
Yeah.
And so education is a huge part of overcoming trauma. It's a huge part of personal success, and getting into the mind frame that, you have to be a lifelong learner. Your education doesn't just
Yeah.
stop after you leave college. You keep learning, and just get used to it, because
Yeah.
that's just the way that it has to be. And you can find education everywhere. The world is your university, and
Yeah.
everybody and
Right.
everything in it is a teacher. And if you look at it like that, then you'll learn so much and you'll gain so much. And then in turn, that'll complement everything else, and just make you feel more confident. It'll make you feel, like you have more insight into what's going on. You'll be able to help others. So much comes from that. So I wanted to end the book on that. And I wanted to, because I feel that, you know, education is like the thing that you just have to get in the mind frame that it's just never going to stop. Keep
Yeah.
learning, keep growing, keep looking for opportunities to better yourself. And it's through education that you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely agree. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
lifelong learning, and there's so much joy in education.
Yeah.
We're kind of reaching the end now. If people, I mean, obviously we'll put all your links on our social media sites, Carlos. But if people want to get hold of you for any of the things that you do, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so www.howtobattle.com. I'm on Instagram at How to Battle, on YouTube at How to Battle, and as well as TikTok, and LinkedIn, all social media platforms at How to Battle. I do coaching programs for the youth. I do coaching programs for men. I do coaching programs that are faith infused. I do coaching, and I just did a coaching program that is actually a correspondence program. If you want to send to the people, if you know anybody that's incarcerated, so that one is like a correspondence program, and then once they
Right.
complete it, they're able to continue to be a part of, the network upon their release to help them transition.
Yeah.
And so, but all that stuff, you can find me on my website. You can email me if you want to know more information about that, and also links to my book too.
Yeah, and I read your book and I would highly recommend it. Yeah, and we'll put links to all of those things on our social media sites. Is there anything before we finish? Is there anything that I haven't asked you, Carlos, that you would like to say? Or
I think that you've asked me amazing questions, and I thank you for that. It's I have a pleasure to meet you and to now know you, and I definitely want to keep in touch. But I just want to say that if anybody out there is listening and they're like, at a point in their life where they're trying to make a shift and they're trying to make a change, um, find somebody to help you. I think that for me, I have coaches and mentors, around me all the time, people that I can call and meet up with on Zooms weekly.
yeah,
Be open to finding somebody to help you. And maybe it's me, maybe it's not. If it's not me, that's fine. Find somebody else that you can connect with. Find somebody, a coach, a mentor, somebody in your life that you can talk to and that could help you improve, right? Somebody that kind of, is more advanced than you or inspires you, and start to ask them for help. People want you to ask for help. So I
yeah,
think that that's a starting point for people out there that are at a stage where they just don't know what to do next. If they're unhappy and they don't know how to get happy and how to have a better life, find people to help you. I know for me, that's been huge in my whole entire life. Starting from the chaplain into now who I am today.
yeah.
So seek help, you know, that's my
Yeah,
message.
that's a really nice message, and really inspiring. I mean, the whole interview. I just want to thank you again, Carlos, for coming on. This is going to be an amazing interview for our listeners. So I really appreciate it, and it has been fantastic to meet you.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Again, I'd just like to thank Carlos for coming on the show. What an inspirational story! What an inspirational man. I often talk about transforming suffering into helping others, and what a wonderful thing that is. And I mean, that really fits Carlos and his story. And I guess the meeting with the chaplain when Carlos was in solitary confinement was a transcendent moment, really. A moment that was a catalyst for Carlos moving in another direction. And also talking around some of the things that Carlos set up in prison, the self-help group with the lifers. What a powerful group that must have been, and what an outlet, for some of these people that had experienced probably trauma, from early on, to be able to open up their trauma and feel safe enough and comforted enough by the group to open up the trauma, get in touch with it, and hopefully process it. I would really recommend Carlos's book, The Price. I've read it a couple of times. I'm holding it up for viewers, people that are watching the YouTube channel. The Price I found to be two things really, amongst others really, but it's a real practical guide, I think, for growth and transcendence. And Carlos will talk about things like routine and some real kind of practical ways to grow and to develop. Education is another one. It's a big chapter. It's the last chapter of the book. But there is also something very transcendent, I think, about the book. Yes, it is about developing your life, positive change, moving forwards in the direction you want. But it is also very much about inspiration, finding your purpose. So it really has both qualities. There is a practical aspect, and routine is another one that Carlos talks about in his book. So practical steps in order to help you maybe push through trauma and push through into personal growth processing and change, but also finding meaning, moving into a transcendent space, finding your inspiration. I mean, all of these are real kind of transcendent, kind of peak types of experience and types of being, types of ways of being in the world. So I'd highly recommend his book. Please find all of Carlos's links on our social media sites. How to Battle Carlos's website has a lot of really, really interesting links on there. So I would encourage our listeners to check it out. Carlos mentioned another book. It'd be really nice, I think, if we could get Carlos on when he's written his second book, in order that he can promote the book in the UK, Australia, and internationally where our listeners are. But also it'd be really, really nice to talk to Carlos again and hear a bit more around his work. Some of the work Carlos does, it's really, really awe-inspiring, isn't it? The work with the youth, the work with the setting up, a correspondence course for people that are incarcerated, that they can not only do the course, and I guess heal and grow, but also connect with the community outside. He offers so much, faith-based groups. There's a lot going on, motivational coaching and the motivational speaking as well to different groups. Really, really fantastic work. Just the epitome, I think, of someone who's changed their life and who's transmuted their own suffering into a life of helping others. I just think that's really wonderful. So thank you. I really hope our listeners have enjoyed this one. We've got a few more coming up soon. I'll be interviewing Anna Lompriere, who's going to be talking about her lived experience with menopause. Anna, as you remember, came on in series 3, I think, talking about her coaching and her work empowering women. So look out for that one. Hopefully that'll be next week. But as always, I just want to thank our listeners for listening. Without you, we wouldn't have a show. And be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and be good to the planet. I'll see you soon on the next episode.